What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the Repster once again, where movies and entertainment are our reputation. So Vampires was directed by John Carpenter and stars James Wood and Daniel Baldwin. After losing his entire team to a ruthless, much stronger vampire, Jack Craw, along with 3 others, go on a mission of justice and vengeance to try and stop this creature before he finds an ancient Catholic relic that will allow vampires to survive in sunlight and be the end to humanity. Alright guys, as usual, let's get into the positives. First and foremost, the story. It was very well told, it was very well done. The film is based on a novel by John Steakley. The writer of this film, Don Jakoby, did a really good job. I never read the story, I never read the book, but I was very impressed by the narrative, by the dynamic of the story. It's basically this badass vampire hunter that loses his entire team at the beginning, goes on a mission to kill this vampire, who is so ruthless and almost to the point of unkillable, like the master vampire. He just finds out he met his match. And after that slaughter scene at the beginning in the hotel, which I will get into further later, who can blame him? It gets pretty gnarly, though not 100%, which I'll get into later, but it's a good film. It's a good film. Yet another well-done film by John Carpenter. It's a decent horror flick. Speaking of the whole look and feel of this film, I liked. It had a very Western vibe to it, like a post-apocalyptic kind of deal. Especially the scenes when the vampires, you see where they sleep, which is basically underground. They dig a hole, and then they just pull dirt over them. And when it hits dusk, they crawl out like zombies, almost. With the dirt on them and stuff. There's a scene where they do that, and you can see the sky in the background, and the clouds, the lighting, and the texture. Very post-apocalyptic, very Western-like. And it was done very beautiful. Down to the clouds, the shadows. Very unique, and it was very cool. Now let's talk characters. They were good, all but one, which I'll get into later, but namely James Wood, who plays the main character of this, Jack Craw. Very tough, very straightforward. James Wood, I think he's a really good actor. He's always been typecast as being a villain. He was actually a villain in White House Down, which actually came out like 7 years ago. But they decided to go with a different route in this. You know, this was released in 1998, so I know some of his films. First one I seen him in was that silly little cameo in Scary Movie 2. But he was also in a Stallone film. I think it was called The Assassin. He was a villain in that. But he's always been typecast, but they decided to do a different route. This movie is basically a horror/action movie. Because there was a lot of explosions. And he plays an action hero in this. Because that's the type of film this actually was. It's a horror/action film. But instead of using someone like Stallone, Schwarzenegger, or Van Damme, or Seagal, which was pretty much the stereotype of films, especially back then in the 90s, of action films, they decided to go with this sort of, and not to be too mean towards this actor, scrawny, short, skinny guy, which is a different approach, but it actually worked in his favor. Because the way he acted in this film, James Wood did a really good job in this. He was actually really good. The character really fit him. And there was so much more to the character than just whooping ass, whooping vampire ass. I mean, you get a little bit of a backstory. He's like a mercenary, but not quite. You know, he's got a personal vendetta against vampires, which happens in his childhood, which they say in context, which really added to the character. And you get why he's somewhat of an asshole sometimes. And he had a lot of dark humor about him. James Wood, he played this character a little dark, a little asshole-ish, and with a side of dark humor, which really told you a lot about that character. He wasn't one to fool around with, but he could also joke with you in a very dark manner, in a very dark tone.
Can I ask you something? Yep. I was kicking your ass back there. Did that give you wood? What? Huh? You get a little mahogany from that, a little ebony? Come on, tell the truth.
But he did a really good job in this film, and I commend him. And we gotta talk about the head villain, Relic, played by Thomas Ian Griffith. This dude, as soon as he shows up, and I gotta mention the slaughterhouse hotel scene, whoa. You know, as soon as he shows up, blood and carnage pretty much is all you see. When he shows up at that hotel, he sticks his hand through that one guy's stomach and then just splits him down the middle. From then on, it's complete chaos and carnage and just blood-soaked all around. Biting and snapping necks, throwing people around. Right in there, you know that he was the main baddie of this film, the main vampire. And he was just one strong MF. And like the massacre boat scene in The Burning, that scene really stood out to me in this film. As they call him, the master vampire, the leader, I guess you could say. And he's one that you should not mess with. He's almost to the point where he's unkillable. But he is the one vampire in this film, the main baddie that's trying to get to this relic, this cross or whatever that was apparently used in a seance that involved his character like eons ago, like in the 1300s. And the way they told his backstory, this particular vampire, it was actually pretty good. In context, you get to find out that he was a priest that turned against the church and that got like a bunch of followers to turn against it. And then they decided to capture him. And, this whole thing with a demon being involved that sort of turned him into a vampire, which was a pretty cool idea. I never really heard that much about demons and vampires intertwining in movies, except for the Supernatural show, of course. But still, that was a pretty interesting concept. I like it when they give like short backstories to the villains and how they get born. It doesn't have to show it, but in context, I think it makes it equally better. Plus, I like the way the vampires looked. The contact lenses that they used was more exorcisy, like in The Exorcist. And, the way the makeup effects looked, it was really cool. And the way that they would take care of the vampires, like when they would explode in the sunlight, after they would be dragged out from like the car after being hooked or like speared, they would drag them out into the sunlight and they would explode, but they would explode like fireworks. Fire coming out from each side of their body until they explode. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Oh, Lord.
Of course, I gotta talk about the direction because it's a John Carpenter film, and I know I probably don't have to, but it's John Carpenter. He's a good director. I always gotta mention that. Though, this is a very different Carpenter film compared to his others. This one is more gnarly, it's more visceral, and it's much more violent. And of course, this film came out in the late 90s, so a lot of things has changed since Carpenter's youth days, back when he made Halloween and The Thing, and They Live and all them. Of course, things changed, so he was able to do like a lot more. But his style was different, but it worked. To me, I thought it was a different pace, I guess you could say. Instead of adding that leaving things up to the mind concept and the mystery of it, which made his older films really great. I mean, don't get me wrong, but this film was a different change of pace, especially for him. And to me, I think it worked. He didn't overdo it, but you do see a lot more than what you would see in his old films like The Fog. And from what I understand, I think this may have been next to the last movie he did. Next one being Ghost of Mars, which I'm hoping to come across that one day so I can review for you guys. But he did do one in 2010, and I believe the name of that one was called The Ward. I've seen it once, but I'll have to go over it again to remember what it was about. But that came out in 2010, and it wasn't really that praised upon, I don't think. It was one of those that hit direct to DVD, if I understand correctly. But that's why I'm still counting this as next to the last, because I believe Ghost of Mars was his last theatrical debut before he sort of retired or quit or whatever you want to call it, until now when he's finally, moving back into the music game and doing these scores for the new Halloween films. But still, in Vampires, I think he did a really good job. Like I say, it was a nice change of pace. And he knew how to kind of get with the times by doing that, by showing more stuff, by showing more gore and blood, and changing the dynamic of things. Same thing with the score. This score, like with the direction and the way things has changed, his score was not like a synthesized, your average, normal, everyday Carpenter score. He scored this film, but you wouldn't know it was a Carpenter film by hearing the score. It had a very Western rock type vibe to it, which fit the picture perfectly because of its look and feel, of its post-apocalyptic Western type feel. It was still very nicely done. The tone and pace was great. It was solid. I was with them all the way. It didn't miss a beat. In other words, I was pretty much invested. And I didn't mention this to y'all before, but this was actually the first time I watched this film. I've never seen it before until just before I started this review. Alright, let's slip into the negatives. This film also starred Sheryl Lee, which was one of those characters that I guess you could say that she had a purpose in it. But I don't know. To me, I just felt like she was kind of in the way. I mean, she was one of those that got bit by the head vampire. And James Woods' character was like, no, we can use her. She was able to see through this vampire's eyes so that they could try to catch up with him and kill him. Yeah, that's a good enough reason, but all she really did was freak out and, just do nothing but that. She didn't really step up to the plate. She didn't really do anything that's actually worthwhile. Which brings me to the relationship between Daniel Baldwin and her character. What the hell was that about? Seriously. I really didn't feel like that was necessary. See, basically, after she gets bit, they have a little scene, Daniel Baldwin and Sheryl Lee, and then later on, he starts developing feelings for her after she's halfway turned. And James Woods is like, what's wrong? What's the matter with you? When he starts getting all hostile. And then you start to get, okay, well, this guy's getting into this girl, so again, what was the point of that? I didn't really feel like it was relevant to the story. I just didn't feel like it was necessary. As much great moments that I did have with this film, I just didn't feel like the impact was as strong. Now, by this time, you had From Dusk Till Dawn, and the same year this film was released, you had Blade. I believe they said that one of the actors that worked on this film actually worked on Blade, and he said that he came straight from that film after that one wrapped onto this film. And they came out the same year. Blade, and then you had years later Underworld and all these others, which to me personally was a little better in terms of, I guess you could say, tone and pace. Even though I said I liked the tone and pace of this film, I just didn't feel like this one brought anything new or any more exciting than those films. This film was good. I'm not trashing this film completely. It was okay. It just didn't really grab me as much as those other vampire films. Those just stood out to me more in the long run. It had more amazement, more excitement. But again, I'm not trashing this film. I still enjoyed this film for what it was. Even though this film doesn't quite live up, it still had its bloody kick-ass moments. It's an acquired taste. So, vampires, or most notably John Carpenter's Vampires, what did you think of it? Was this your favorite vampire film? Or did you like the others that I mentioned, like Blade, Underworld, and etc.? Leave me a comment down below and give me your thoughts. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this video. As usual, like, subscribe, and comment if you hadn't already. And I'll see you on the next video. Peace, the Reptastic.